Andrew Joseph III was more than a name. He was a young man who stood up for other kids when they were being bullied. He was a neighbor who brought in people's trash cans if they stayed curbside for too long. He was an athlete who competed in football, track, and swimming. This young man came from a family of devout Catholics and had readied for his confirmation. The religious ceremony was set for the morning of February 8th, 2014. He lost his life the night before. His mom, Mrs. Deanna Joseph, let a federal jury know all of these things when she testified as the first witness in a lawsuit over her son's death. This young king was hit by an SUV on Interstate 4 about 2 hours after Hillsborough County Sheriff deputies kicked him out of the Florida State Fair, which is held in Tampa, Florida. His parents accused the sheriff and one deputy of setting the events that led to the tragedy into motion. Their lawyers asked the jury to award $30 million to compensate their loss. During her time on the witness stand during the trial, her attorney, Guy Robin, asked Mrs. Deanna Joseph questions designed to get an understanding of what her life was like before her loss. She shared that she grew up in Louisiana. She came from a close-knit family who instilled a belief in integrity and a righteous social order. She was asked what she thought of police when she was growing up. She stated, "Police were respected in our community. They were our neighbors." She shared that she met her husband, Andrew Joseph Jr., while they were both in college. They got married and had their son and also a daughter. She obtained a degree in social work and worked as an employment coach and for a cerebral palsy charity. The family lost their home and livelihood in Hurricane Katrina. They came to Florida to rebuild. The Josephs moved to a home in Riverview near the Fishhawk Ranch area. They liked the area because it was safe. Andrew Joseph III was well known among neighbors. He had many friends and was known for his humorous nature. His mother stated, "Andrew made more friends than we did. Everyone knew Andrew before they knew us." The young man was in the 8th grade at St. Stephen's Catholic School in the weeks preceding his death. He had been checking his mailbox every day for a letter to see if he had been accepted to Tampa Catholic High School. The majority of his friends attended public schools where kids got free tickets to Student Day at the Florida State Fair. His mother had looked into Student Day and she had no concerns about her son's safety while he would be there. He planned to go with a few other kids from the neighborhood. Mrs. Joseph stated that she knew them as exceptional children who came from good families. When his friend's mom came by to take him and other kids to the fair, Mrs. Joseph exchanged numbers with her. Okay. It was a little chilly that night, so she told her son to go back inside and get a jacket. Mrs. Joseph watched them drive off. Then she went back inside to iron her son's shirt and slacks that he planned on wearing to his confirmation. Okay. Corporal Mark Clark, a defendant in the lawsuit, also testified. His voice was monotone and he gave short, to the point answers to questions from Chris Anowicz, one of the lawyers representing the Josephs. He stated that he did not remember detaining Andrew Joseph III, but he did not dispute that it was him who ejected the young man from the fair. He said that his job involved crowd control and security on the midway and ensuring the safety of the fair patrons. He had worked the fair many times over the span of 20 years. When asked if he treated kids and adults the same way, he replied, "I try to respect everybody." Corporal Clark also made a distinction between arresting a person and simply detaining them. The young man was detained for what was described as running through the midway, causing disorderly conduct, according to a written report. In the event he had been arrested, he would have been taken to a juvenile assessment center and released to an adult's custody. Since he was only detained, deputies drove him to the edge of the fairgrounds and let him go. He was one of numerous kids who were removed from the fair that night. There were no requirements in place that the parents of children put out of the fair must be notified. That has since been changed. Although the sheriff's office had prepared an action plan for how to handle security at the fair, Corporal Clark said that he had not seen it and did not believe other deputies had either. He was asked about the procedures for ejecting people from the fair. Did he know that deputies were supposed to release people safely? His answer was, "I believe that's part of it." "Excuse me, sir? What?" "You believe that's part of it." "You should absolutely know that's part of it." Corey Thornton was 12 the night he went with Andrew Joseph III to the Florida State Fair. His mother would only allow him to go if he was with Joseph, who at 14 was like a neighborhood big brother. Corey, who was now 21, sat on a witness stand in a Tampa federal courtroom and detailed everything the two young men did the night of February 7th, 2014. Mr. Thornton's memories of that night, still very vivid 8 years later, were the focus of the fifth day of testimony in the federal lawsuit the Josephs brought against Hillsborough County Sheriff's officials. He pressed a finger to a touchscreen to draw a red line over an aerial map of the fairgrounds. He showed a jury the path he and Andrew walked as they struggled to find their way back to the main gate where they were to be picked up. He described their run across the interstate and Andrew's decision to turn back before he was struck by an SUV. "Didn't make it back," Thornton said, his eyes beginning to fill with tears. He let out a few breaths and said, "I can't do this, man." Judge Mary Scriven paused the trial. Thornton left for a few moments, then returned to continue testifying. The story he told supported the case that lawyers for Joseph's family have argued, that sheriff's deputies neglected their duty by not notifying the teens' parents after they were put out of the fair. Before the young men went, they planned everything that they would need. They arranged their ride, got money to buy food, and put together the outfits they would wear. It was chilly that night, so Andrew Joseph III allowed Corey Thornton to borrow his coat, a racing-style jacket with the M&M's logo on it. Thornton stated that he most looked forward to getting on rides. When asked was it the place to be for a kid, he replied, "Of course, it was the fair." Corey Thornton recalled their initial encounter with law enforcement on the Midway. He said they had been at the fair less than half an hour when Andrew stopped to talk to a girl he knew. As they talked, two deputies passed, escorting another teen boy who had been detained. Andrew recognized the teen and began to follow deputies. "He's like, 'That's my cousin,'" Thornton said. "What's going on with my cousin?" The deputies didn't say anything. As Corey Thornton followed, he felt someone grab him from behind. He identified the person who grabbed him as Mark Clark, a now retired sheriff's deputy. Corey and Andrew were taken to a fenced-in area where they were made to empty their pockets and had their pictures taken and entered into a database. Thornton was scared. Andrew, seeking to reassure him, told him they had done nothing wrong and to cooperate. Mr. Thornton said, "I didn't know if I was going to leave that processing center perfectly fine or if I'd leave with bruises and bumps." The two young men were ultimately driven in a windowless van to a field near Orient Road, then let out, and the van drove off. The two young men walked across a wet, muddy field to a guard shack, where they sought refuge under an overhang. A deputy told them that they could not stay there. Thornton stated they then walked to Gate 4, the westward-facing entrance to the fair. He said they encountered another deputy there. He said the deputy wore a green uniform with a name tag and badge. He could not remember his name. He and Andrew asked if they could re-enter the fair to get back to the main gate where they had been dropped off. He said the deputy refused and told them they were trespassing and that the only thing separating them from the main gate was the interstate. They then walked back out to Orient Road, went north beneath an overpass, turned right, and went through the Hard Rock Casino and back outside. They could see the lights from the fairgrounds beyond the interstate. Corey Thornton said barbed wire lined the top of a fence that bordered the roadway. They found an opening in the fence and moved toward the highway. They ran across 8 traffic lanes and began to walk east. Just then, Andrew got a phone call. Mr. Thornton could not hear what was said. When Andrew hung up, he said they needed to turn back. They ran again across the interstate. Lawyers did not ask Corey Thornton what he saw. He did not stay at the crash scene. Instead, he walked back to Orient Road and back to the fair, where he finally met his ride. At first, he didn't tell anyone what he had seen. He said it did not seem real. And I can only imagine for this 12-year-old boy to see something like this, that he just went into shock. That was very traumatic, what this young man had witnessed. Okay, so the legal counsel for the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office originally tried to block Mr. Corey Thornton from being able to testify, saying that the testimony would be hearsay. They did not want him to testify that it was a deputy that told them to cross Interstate 4 to find their ride home after the 2 young men were kicked out of the fair. Judge Mary Scriven chose to deny the defense team's attempt to block the testimony. According to the Florida Highway Patrol, at around 10:45 p.m., Andrew Joseph III was hit by a vehicle driven by 19-year-old Jonathan M. Hatfield. Andrew was pronounced dead at the scene at 11:03 p.m. When Corey Thornton later recounted what happened to others, he said, "So I was behind him and I saw him get hit. And I was like, no, this did not just happen in front of my eyes. So that's when I went to him and I was like, get up, get up." And he didn't move. I didn't know what to do, so I just ran back the way we came from. Corey was so shaken up that when he arrived at the pickup location and got the ride home, he didn't even tell anyone, including his parents, what happened. The Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office released video showing those at the fair running in what Colonel Jim Prevera referred to as a giant stampede. The majority of those ejected from the fair were black, so it seems as if Andrew's only crime was inquiring into the circumstances involving his friends who appeared to be under arrest by police. The young man's father, Andrew Joseph Jr., says that his son was affectionately called Pee-wee, never had any disciplinary issues at school or otherwise, and was an honor roll student. A law enforcement expert told the court during the trial that the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office violated the Constitution and state law by taking the children into custody with no evidence of a crime and failing to contact their parents. On September 22, 2022, a jury in the Tampa Federal Courthouse awarded $15 million in damages to the parents of Andrew Joseph III in the wrongful death lawsuit. Following the ruling, the young man's father, Andrew Joseph Jr., stated, "We have restored honor to his name, to my father's name. Andrew Joseph III has been acquitted of doing anything wrong. We've had to carry this heavy burden and story of a child whose life was compromised, knowing full well that his death was senseless and preventable," Andrew Joseph III's mother Mrs. Deanna Joseph said following the ruling. Sheriff Chad Chronister released a statement following the ruling. It reads as follows: losing a child is heartbreaking and eternal grief that no parent should have to face, and we continue to keep the Joseph family in our prayers. The Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office and the Florida State Fair Authority refute wrongdoing, saying Andrew Joseph III was hit hours after he was ejected and there was nothing they could do. Despite the legal win, the family said their fight on behalf of their son is far from over. Mrs. Deanna Joseph stated, "We want to be able to have the Andrew Joseph Foundation promote safety first at that venue." The Josephs are currently fighting to end qualified immunity. Qualified immunity is a court-created rule that limits victims of police violence and misconduct from holding officers accountable when they violate a person's constitutional rights. It is intended to protect government officials who make reasonable but mistaken judgments about open legal questions, extending to all officials but the plainly incompetent or those who knowingly violate the law. Qualified immunity applies only to government officials in civil litigation and does not protect the government itself from lawsuits arising from the actions of officials. Mr. and Mrs. Joseph stated that the sheriff's office filed several appeals over the previous 8 years in an attempt to use qualified immunity as a defense, which prolonged their pursuit of justice. In the last appeal filed October 12, 2021, a panel of federal judges rejected the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office's appeal, which stopped them from being able to use the legal doctrine in the case. Mrs. Deanna Joseph stated, "We will always have qualified immunity working in our case." Okay. Even after a district trial, okay, if we win, they will file an appeal for qualified immunity. So it seems as if even though they have won, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office could still go ahead and file an appeal through using the qualified immunity doctrine. Okay? So because of this legal doctrine, it took them 8 years to even be able to take the lawsuit to court. Democratic Representative Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts has said even in the most egregious cases of brutality and misconduct, qualified immunity has allowed police officers like the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office to use their badge as a shield from accountability. We can't allow these fatal injustices to go unchecked any longer. Now, I've read and heard a lot of different stories, cases, and instances of social injustice, but there was just something about this family and their young king's story that absolutely just broke my heart. I was in tears. I was literally sobbing as I read the timeline of his last moments and about him and his friends' time at the fair and how they were treated. I cannot imagine the level of grief his parents, their family members, and friends of the family have experienced. Okay, these were minors. Okay, these babies' parents most definitely should have been contacted. They should have ensured that these children were released to their parents. My deepest condolences to Mr. and Mrs. Joseph, their entire family, and friends of the family. Prayers of peace and comfort. Andrew Joseph III, I am so sorry. Rest well, young king. It has been a long road for his parents, but this young man's name has finally been cleared.
No peace! No peace!
It is my mission that nobody else would have to stand in the shoes that I'm standing in here now.
Your kid has been killed. Your kid has been dropped off somewhere by sheriff's office. He don't know where he at. That's not right. That's not right. Something needs to be done.
We are TPW! We are TPW! We are TPW! We are TPW! Who are you? TPW! Who are you? TPW! Who are you? TPW! They think it's a game!
They think it's a joke!
They think it's a game!
And it shouldn't have to have a death of a 14-year-old, honor-roll model child to bring these type of changes and to bring this type of awareness to an event that's been in our community, has been pollution to our community for plenty of years. Since it was Midnight Madness, to where it goes all the way back to Negro Day. Well, the black folks was allowed to come to the fair for free on Negro Day. But you had to bring your own food because the vendors wouldn't serve you. If you're able to put my son in the car and transport him away from the fairgrounds and abandon him 100 yards from the interstate, that's a modern day lynching. Same policies and procedures. Nothing has changed but the name here in Cracker Country.
We're out here today for Andrew Joseph III. Like, we don't do it, who else gonna do it? Like, we dying every 28 hours. Like, what more to say? They poison our water, they sending our kids to jail. We dying every 28 hours. They killing us, making us believe that we need to kill ourselves. So when we gonna stand up?
Do not doubt that you aren't a part of this struggle. Each one of us are in it. And we all have to come together to end it.
What side are you on, my people? What side are you on?
We cannot stay and watch from the distance. As our people go down, and as lives are taken by others less valuable.
What's about to happen to you?
We're gonna get arrested, and this is campground with Andrew Joseph III at murder a 14-year-old, and our blood cannot be shed in the way that it has.
Stand up, awoken warriors. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all of your support, all of the love. It is greatly appreciated. Please let me know what you think down below in the comment section.